Yeah, no, it's not really just for you, Maria, it's
Okay.
actually for everybody, and it was
Great.
Nigel who made me think of it with disturbance, but nobody's talked about pigs and the role of pigs, and are there any pigs on the Burren? Because they would be brilliant for, I don't know, solitary bees and butterflies and flora as well, and whether anyone has any opinion.
Any pig experts in it?
I didn't have an answer to that question. I had another question, if that's okay, because there's no, there's very little pig farming in the Burren, bar one or two locations, which are a little bit more mainstream type land. I had a question for Tim about the Lassis flavus, which is fantastic. We've been looking at them for years, but two questions. One, what's the impact of shading on the anthills? And secondly, is there a preferred substrate on which the ant builds the hill? Is it bare pavement? Is it certain depths of soil, or does it matter? And the third small question was, what causes the ant to vacate certain anthills?
Sorry.
What causes the ants to vacate anthills? You said there was a certain number of them had been vacated or abandoned. What's the reason why?
Well, the reaction to shade is that shade gradually reduces the number of queens and drones produced by the colony. The ants seem to react to the shade by building taller, and that was shown in a very nice controlled experiment in Belgium about 15 years ago, where they looked at the rate of anthill growth in a shaded and uncontrolled situation, and in the Grace situation the anthills grew at a third of the rate that they grew in the shaded situation. So they respond by building taller at first, but ultimately they can't keep pace and the colony dies out. And so under hazel scrub you could probably see the remnants of the old anthills, just like you can in England under scrub which colonised after myxomatosis hit the rabbit population in 1955. You could still see the remnants, but the anthills aren't there. Now the second question was...
With regard to the substrate?
Substrate. No, no particular substrate. They can build even on sand dunes. They can build between the tide marks. There's a site called the Old Hall Marshes in Essex where they are submerged for about half the tidal cycle, and the whole half square mile is covered with anthills, which survive. They can survive that sort of inundation, regular inundation, in salt water, and they occur in wide range of different substrates, acid, calcareous, and so on. Doesn't make any difference. And they're incredibly resilient against damage by grazy animals. You need a very high density of cattle before they'll really eliminate the anthills. A small proportion, of course, are destroyed by grazers, but it's not a very high proportion, and they tend to persist. And the third one
was about abandonment. Other than shading, what causes abandonment of the anthills? Why do anthills abandon?
Large groups in open air, you mean? I would have thought it was very unusual, but it could be. I've scarcely ever seen abandonment in open fields, except where the vegetation itself has been removed, because then they've got no aphids in order to feed. And in fact, it's some time before ants colonise. These particular ants colonise a new environment. Several studies in Germany and so on have shown that in grasslands, the grasslands have to be roughly 25 years old before you get a lot of anthills obvious on the site. Lasius niger is a sort of tramp species, the black ant, which colonizes everywhere at first. Lasius flavus ultimately wins over it and starts building from then on, and then it can get rid of Lasius niger. But Myrmica scabrinodes often is capable of, in small quantities, invading the anthills and destroying the Lasius flavus colonies, but never on a very large scale.
Just while we have Tim, there was a question for you earlier online. Yesterday we saw some anthills in the field in the Burren National Park, and Phoebe Larkin was asking if you would have any idea or guess at how old they were and how deep the anthills go below soil surface.
I see. Well, the depth of the anthills depends on the soil depth, and I don't know in those particular places how deep the soils were. I mean, there were some ex-quarries there, and I would guess the soil wasn't all that deep. So the soil, the anthills will, the channels will go down to the surface rock, which often will be half a metre down, I would guess. The ants tend to build in some of the deepest soils. The other component in the question was?
How old they might be.
I see. Well, I thought the majority were probably of the sort of age where 75 to 125 years old, I imagine, from their size. Yeah. But I don't know what the history of the area has been. What happened to it after the potato famine, for example?
I'm seeing shrugs from Emma, so I don't know if anybody else has an answer there. No. We might need some historians.
By way of a partial answer to that, like where the soils are very thin, there won't have been a massive amount of change other than hazel scrub, I guess.
Yes,
expanding and retreating
presumably
or expanding and being
a lot
cut.
of that hazel scrub might have invaded after the potato famine. And you could tell it had invaded previous fields because the hazel got over the walls which formed formerly between grass and fields.
I was walking beside you yesterday and you said, hey, we're crossing another wall inside in this hazel woodland. Yeah. So look, my question follows on very closely to that. I've seen you talk before about an index whereby you use the size, number, height of anthills on a site or in a grassland to help indicate the age of that grassland. And I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit about that. I realise you can't present any formula or anything, but just to raise that awareness that such an index exists.
Yes, such an index does exist, and it's that's what that graph was based on, the actual line graph. In fact, I had a slide explaining the index on the end of the slides, but I think my presentation was too long and Brian got me to take the slide off. It's one of the main components is the number of, what I tend to do is to earmark a site which is 10 by 10 metres, selected at random, and do it 3 times in the same place, and estimate the size of every single anthill in that 100 square metres. And I do that by estimating its height 4 different points of the compass and its diameter 2 ways, and calculate the volume of each anthill on a spreadsheet by regarding them as a segment of a sphere. And then I add them all up and so on. And a critical element in this 3-way assessment is the proportion of anthills in a site over 70 litres in diameter. And that seems to be critical. So a quick estimate would if you actually calculate this, and you can get lots of citizen scientists to do it, they enjoy doing it, actually measuring the anthills, and they learn a lot about ecology whilst doing it, is the proportion of anthills more than 70 litres in diameter. And in an old site, it tends to be 40 or 50% of the anthills are over 70 litres in diameter, And in a young site, say less than 40 years old, it tends to be sort of more like 5%. Just the occasional anthill reaches that size. So it's a rough rule of thumb. But there is a detailed formula. Yeah.
Okay, folks, I think we're going to have to end the question session there because lunch, I see, is outside. So we have a few minutes to of the online audience still present to sum up. And for some reason, Anya handed me a microphone and then ran away. So I think she's expecting me to sum up, and I don't know how to sum up because the talks have been absolutely excellent. And so first of all, I want to thank all the speakers for their excellent presentations. Everybody kept the time. Everybody was very clear. Excellent slides. The technology worked perfectly, and that's where I'm now going to go next to the two guys. The online audience can't see them, but the two guys, well, if they turn the cameras, they might be able to see them. But absolutely, without James and Fergal, we would not have had this thing. So a great thank, and they have had very trying circumstances in which to work. We also want to thank, I don't see Tim or Agnes here, but the Michael Cusack Centre, obviously, for hosting us. They've been absolutely excellent. Even the very odd things that we asked them to do, like put 2 moth traps out, was taken with absolutely no problem for them. So again, great thanks to them. It's a great venue. Everybody who's here, everybody online, thank you all for attending and making this conference. I think, when Anya said we came up with this idea, when Anya came up with this idea, and I can't remember what it was, but it has grown. And thanks, Maria, for those comments about President. You did help. You did help a lot. And Ferdia. Yes. Oh, yeah. Maria suggested a lot of the talks. So she was very integral to the programme. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. I think there are, I don't need to say the messages that are really. I mean, the Burren is a wonderful place. Brendan has got a very hard job, and he does it very well, however. And long may it continue. And the Burren is big, and it can take all these pressures, all these demands of archaeologists, grassland ecologists, molluscs, woodland ecologists. The trouble with the Burren, for the Burren, is everybody trying to put it all into the Burren, and we're forgetting about the rest of Ireland. We mustn't do that, but the Burren still stands above everything else, in my view. And long may that continue. So thank you all very much for taking part. Anya, I will now hand the microphone to Anya, because I'm sure she will want to say something very quickly. She's shaking here, but no, she doesn't. Okay, we're going to end. So James, we can switch this off, and we can all go to lunch and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.